Hello, I'm Keith Law. Thank you all so much for joining me today. I am here to answer your draft questions, your prospect questions, maybe some board game questions, or some book questions, maybe some movie questions, just whatever's on your mind, mostly is fair game. But in particular, would love to talk about this year's MLB draft, which is 4 months from tomorrow, as it turns out, July 10th, same day as the Futures game. I put up my first content related at all to this year's draft, a ranking just of the top 30 players in the draft class, so roughly the first round's worth of players. That went up for subscribers to The Athletic last week, and that will expand as the spring goes on. I figure a couple weeks from now, I'll take it out to 50, and then probably May or so, take it out to 100 names, and then we'll kind of see how it goes, because this year, unlike in any previous year of the draft, the college season will be complete before we draft. And now Major League Baseball is at least planning to hold this draft league in the mid-Atlantic region. Trenton, it's only about an hour from me, so I'll be able to go see some of these players. We'll see the caliber of players who come there and to what extent players are able to maybe improve or I guess possibly hurt their draft stock by continuing to play. And I think that'll be especially key for high school players who come from states where the high school season hasn't started yet. I mean, North Carolina, they don't start until I think the very last week of April. And also that I think it'll help players maybe from some smaller schools who are just under-scouted, not smaller colleges and universities who are maybe under-scouted, or even schools like Lehigh, for example, I think is still not allowing scouts or media into their games. So when they're on the road outside of their conference, they can be scouted. But so far, at least for the next couple of weeks, it appears that no one will be able to go see Mason Black in person. I'm hoping that's going to change as the virus situation improves and the weather warms up. Hopefully we'll see these numbers continue to decline. If you have questions for me, submit them. I know you can see you may be watching this through multiple different channels, but I will try to take as many questions of yours as I can in the next 45 minutes or so. Very first question is Jack Leiter. Well, these are not questions, but I will read them anyway. One says, Jersey boy and Del Barton grad Jack Leiter. Love it. He was a classmate, actually, of Anthony Volpe, who was the Yankees' first-round pick 2 years ago. The Yankees did, I believe, draft Leiter very late, but it was clear he wasn't going to sign. He was going to go to Vanderbilt. And I think in his case, it is working out. He was a bit of an unusual exception. Generally, I say high school pitchers should really sign if they're going to get first or second round money, give or take. But Leiter had a couple things different. He was 19 as a senior, so he's sophomore eligible to only 2 years till he got back into the draft instead of 3. He obviously came from pretty privileged circumstances as somebody whose father played a very long time in the big leagues, whose uncle played in the big leagues, whose cousin played in the big leagues, and went to a fairly expensive private school. So I think Jack could easily stomach that risk. And also, although this is no guarantee, Jack Leiter had pretty good delivery and pretty good chance to stay healthy. Maybe a better chance than, say, JT Ginn, who went through the same thing and was also 19 as a high school senior, was sophomore eligible, but got hurt before he managed to get back into the draft. Mark Hewlett. Hi, Mark. Jack Leiter is definitely number one, but Kumar Rocker would be a nice consolation prize. Pirates and Rangers could use the impact arms. Yes, I agree. And I said even in my podcast this week where I interviewed Tristan McKenzie, he was my guest, but I also took a few draft questions there too. Just people, obviously, we're at that time of year. Let's talk draft. If you want to tell me Kumar Rocker is going to be the first pick in the draft, I'm not really arguing. I think Leiter is the better pick. Because there are no ties in these rankings. I'm not going to cop out like that, but Kumar Rocker is a great prospect. He's very, very talented. So is Jordan Lawler, who I have ranked second. So I have Leiter 1, Rocker 3, Lawler between them. Any of those guys could go number 1. I think Lawler, actually, as much as I think he is a tremendous prospect, that's probably too risky of a profile for the Pirates to take at first overall. I would say right now, I would think it's more likely they take Leiter or Rocker, or maybe even Jaden Hill of LSU, than take the high school position player first overall, just because of the risk and because as talented as Lawler is, it's no guarantee he's going to hit. Whereas with Leiter, Rocker, to a little lesser extent with Hill, just because he hasn't pitched as much, you have a pretty good idea what you're getting. Who are some of the best college players that are considered bat first players? That's a good question. I tend to rank those guys quite a bit lower. I'm actually pulling up my own list right here. Like Colton Cowser of Sam Houston, he is definitely a bat first. Not only is he a bat first, but I think he's more of a hit over power type. You're going to have to do some things to try to unlock some power there. I think Ethan Wilson of South Alabama is seen that way. Well, Sal Frelick, now he is not bat first in the sense that he has some positional value, certainly. And he is a tremendous runner. So I don't know if you mean bat over glove and position, or if you mean bat like hit over power. Like Frelick is a guy who's going to hit for average, but right now he's probably not going to hit for much power. There were also some of these guys coming, Isaiah Thomas and Justice Thompson, who are pretty toolsy guys, but whose bats are they've gotten off to really good starts, but maybe not against great competition. But they could end up being guys who are not bat-only prospects, but whose offensive performance really carries them substantially up the board. I don't think either is a first-rounder right now. I think both have a lot more to prove. Justice Thompson is actually particularly interesting just because he came from a junior college, so we don't have really any track record with him. How does Leiter compare to past number one overalls? I think he'd be a pretty solid number one overall pick, but he is not at the level. There's nobody in this class who's like a Bryce Harper, Steven Strasburg, Garrett Cole. I mean, those guys were 3 consecutive number one overall picks, and they were no doubters. Those were all years where if you took someone else, you were probably making a mistake. And in hindsight, it was more or less true if you'd taken someone else, unless the Nationals were not taking Mike Trout that year. So I'm not going to second guess that decision. Steven Strasburg's been very, very good. So is Harper. Obviously, so has Cole. Even if they haven't necessarily been the absolute best in their draft classes, they've all turned out to be worthy of going number one overall, top 5 overall in their drafts. I don't think Leiter is that, and I think Leiter's a great prospect. I do not think he is that sort of prospect where if you took someone else, you're clearly making a mistake at that point. It's not. I don't think he's like that. As I said, I think there's 2 other college pitchers who are all very close to him, and it may come down to sort of what's your favorite flavor. If your favorite flavor of ice cream is chocolate, great. If you decide to have coffee or mint chocolate chip instead, great. If you have rum raisin, then you're wrong. So you can still make that mistake. Who are the Brewers looking at? So I will tell you right now, no team at this point really knows who they're taking. We are 4 months away from the draft. I have been in the draft room. I have been in front office over multiple seasons. At this point in the calendar, 4 months out, we were figuring out who we absolutely needed to scout for consideration at our pick, and who were the handful of guys, except for the year we picked 6th, but the other 4 years I was involved in the draft process, we picked in the teens. All of those years, who are the guys we maybe need to see once and can just forget about? Like Justin Upton is not getting to our pick. BJ Upton, I think that was my first draft. That guy's not getting to our pick. The area guy will go in, maybe give him a cursory look. Maybe if you can line him up and see someone else on the same day, sure, just to check it off, just to make sure you saw him. God forbid something goes wrong and he slips to your pick, because it does happen every once in a while, just to make sure you're covered. But you're just trying to put guys in buckets, the must-sees that don't really bothers, and hey, these guys are good, but they're not for that pick. And we often talked about tweeners too, the guys who would probably, they're not good enough to take with your first-round pick, but they're going to be gone by your second-round pick. Nobody knows no team right now says, well, no, we're taking this guy. They just don't know that. And I have said this before. If you look online and people are saying, oh, so-and-so isn't getting past the Royals this year, it's just not true. They're making it up. Sorry. Let's see. Let me scroll back up here. Appreciate all the questions coming in. Would Luke Leto would he be a fit for his hometown Detroit Tigers? It's a funny thing in baseball, but you actually don't get any extra points for winning with players from your own hometown. You take the best player. Luke Leto is not a first rounder. He could be a second rounder. He's going to have a lot of bias against him as a cold weather high school guy. But I will say you do not want your team to fall into the trap of taking the guy because he's local. The Royals even did that, and I will say defend the Royals on this. It was not a bad pick. The 4 other players they wanted went 1, 2, 3, 4 that year, and the Royals picked 5th. but they took Bubba Starling. And I know at the very least, there was at least pressure, internally, local pressure, take the local kid. He's a superstar. He was clearly a first-round talent. A lot went wrong after that. I think we as an industry just missed on Bubba Starling. The fact that he was already 19 at the draft or very close to 19 also didn't help. I am not picking on the Royals for that, but I also point to that as an example of, guess what? There's no benefit to taking the local guy. And you really shouldn't do that. The Tigers did that with Daniel Fields a couple of years ago. I think they mishandled him a little bit. That was a previous regime, and they rushed him to A-ball at high A at 19, I believe, and he never recovered. But again, you don't get extra points. You get extra points for taking the best player. So if Luke Leto is the best player on the board when they pick in the third round, great. He's not a consideration for the first-round pick. Should not be a consideration for the first-round pick. What is my scouting take on Judd Fabian? I've answered this in a couple of different places. I apologize if you've seen it already, but Fabian cannot hit a breaking ball. Teams just keep throwing him sliders, and he is not adjusting. He really doesn't have a track record of performance. I'm a bit surprised how many people have asked me about Fabian. I can only assume that's because maybe some non-draft experts have talked the guy up. He doesn't even have Robbie Martin's track record of performance. Robbie Martin is a guy who, like, his first year at Florida State, it was like, that guy's going to be a first rounder in 2 years. And he just hasn't followed it up. He really hasn't progressed. If anything, I think he's gone backwards a little bit physically and a little bit in his approach. Robbie Martin's probably still going in the top 50 picks. Judd Fabian could go in the top 50 picks. Guys like that who have college position players who have some tools, but a massive deficiency at the plate. And bear in mind, Fabian hasn't even faced good pitching yet. They haven't even gotten to SEC play. Cam Meisner comes to mind as a guy like that who 2 years ago went in the comp round. He was an extra pick. Someone would take Fabian with their second pick, figuring, well, we already got one in the bag, right? We got we got our high floor safe college guy with the first pick. Now we can roll the dice on someone like Fabian, who's got huge variance. There's a good chance his floor is an A-ball player. Jaron Kendall also comes to mind. Now, Kendall's issue was much more of a swing mechanics issue than a pitch recognition issue. And Kendall's an example of a guy who hasn't gotten a lick better because he refused to make the adjustment. He really has not worked with Dodgers coaches at all. But it made sense for them to take him where they took them. I think they picked 20th, 22nd, 23rd, somewhere around there. And that was a point where this guy's got top 5 tools. He's not usually if he were a better player, if he were a better performer, he wouldn't have gotten to our pick. So you could see something like that happen with Fabian. But if opponents keep throwing him sliders and he keeps missing, he is not going to go in the first round. As of now, who would Kansas City like to be sitting there at their pick? I would refer back to my earlier answer. They don't know. Look, if Jack Leiter gets there, obviously they're going to be thrilled because they would expect him to be gone by their pick. But that's not a guarantee, and it's not a guarantee that that's the guy who's going to be at the top of their board either. What the board you see that I put up is a combination of what I know about these players, because I've seen some of them before. Many of them I saw in high school, actually. But this year in particular, more drawn from talking to scouts about players, because I haven't been out. I barely saw anybody last spring, and I did see Matt McClain last spring, as it turns out. And I haven't been out yet this spring. I am hoping that would be, today's Tuesday, 10 days from now, I will get out to my first college game. We'll see. That depends on weather and access. Obviously, teams have to be willing to let us in. Astros prospects to watch out for. Well, I have a whole top 20 for the Astros and identified certain players I thought were sleepers or potential risers. I will give a little teaser of an article I have coming out tomorrow for subscribers to The Athletic. Many of you asked who are the prospects I was most interested in seeing this year when I am able to go back out to minor league games. When we have minor league games and I'm able to go, which may wait until I've gotten at least my first shot of any vaccine, which I was hoping was going to be this month, but Delaware does seem to be lagging a little bit behind the schedule they had set out for themselves. Anyway, Pedro Leon was the Astros' big signing in the international free agent market this winter, but unlike most players signed at that in that market, because he's a Cuban defector rather than a player who came up through the Dominican or Venezuela through the traditional pipelines, Leon is 22. He did play a little bit in their Serie Nacional a couple of years ago. Now, he didn't face very good pitching, but he performed extremely well. And by multiple accounts, he has elite tools. 80 run, 80 arm, plus raw power. Now, we don't really know if he can hit, but if it turns out he's got even adequate pitch recognition, he's going to be a pretty good player, and he probably will come fairly quickly. So I'm really, really intrigued by him. Where do I see Wes Clark going in the draft? No player is having a better college season so far. Well, I want to see, actually, I'm going to pull up who he, the problem with what guys are doing so far. And I mean, Clark you want to talk about a bad first prospect, right? It's not clear what position he has, what position he'll ultimately be able to play. Yeah. Who has South Carolina played so far? Dayton. Clemson's okay. Mercer. They're playing the Citadel tonight. Now, this weekend, they're playing Texas, in Texas. So, assuming they don't all get the B117 variant while they're there, because obviously in Texas, they've decided that the virus is over. Apparently, you can decide these things by political edict. That's good pitching. That's probably the first good pitching that South Carolina is going to face, that South Carolina has faced, and thus that Clark has faced all year. This matters. This came up. That's the other guy I was going to mention. Meisner, I mentioned earlier once in the context of Fabian, too. Meisner came out of the chute on fire in his draft year. And the moment he got to SEC play, he went, Anthony Greer did that 3 years before that, out of Auburn. He was hitting out of his mind in non-conference play. And the moment SEC play started, it's the best conference in the country, and this year especially, there is a ton of pitching, especially good right-handed pitching in the SEC this year. The moment that Greer got to the SEC, he just stopped hitting. Strikeout rate went up. I believe it was well over 30% in SEC play. He stopped hitting. He stopped hitting for power. A lot of these guys who were off to huge statistical starts, some of them will continue it. I'm not saying Clark won't, but do not get caught up in what is this, almost like spring training stats for these guys. A lot of these non-conference schedules are really not good. Florida, again, it came up with Fabian. You look at who he played. I watched one of the games that he played against Samford. He homered on a little league breaking ball from a left-hander. I understand it counts in the stats, but it is certainly not predictive that a guy can hit a bad breaking ball from an opposite side pitcher from a much, an inferior level of competition. That doesn't tell us much about the kind of player he's going to be when he gets into pro ball. Is this a fluke, or is Boston area baseball actually improving? I think it's more up and down. I think it is cyclical. There was a year when I lived there where there were quite a few prospects coming out of Boston area, or even just New England high school players. I think it was Tyler Beatty, Kevin Comer, Andrew Chin the same year. Because I feel like they were all on the area codes team the same year. They may have been 2 consecutive years, but there have absolutely been years where we've seen a bunch of players either drafted high out of New England high schools or at least highly ranked, and then they've chosen to go to college, obviously, because you do see a lot of kids up there who come from more affluent backgrounds and thus have are more willing to risk going to college, or maybe the families are just more college oriented. And that's fine. If that's your family's belief that the education comes first, who am I to argue? I have far too much education for my own good. Do I think top prospects will all participate in the MLB Draft League after the end of the spring seasons, or I think many will opt out? Well, I think many will be invited, and the best players will decline because there's no reason for them to go. If you already know you're going in the top 10 picks, you have no reason to go play in the draft league. That is even more true if you're a pitcher. But if Jordan Lawler believes he's going in the top 5 picks, there's no reason for him to come there and keep playing. My guess is that league will be full of 3rd to 5th rounders, and that's great. I actually am, first of all, as somebody who will go see those games, I am absolutely thrilled to go watch a bunch of 3rd to 5th rounders. That sounds great to me. Some of them will end up going a little bit higher. Maybe somebody goes to that league and plays himself into the back of the first round. It's not out of the question. That would probably be somebody who is under-scouted in the spring. You know who this would have helped a lot? Rockies fans would know who I'm talking about. The average fan may not, just because he's not a significant prospect yet. But 2 years ago, their 4th round pick was a kid named Brenton Doyle out of Shepherd University, a Division II school in West Virginia that I can honestly say I had never heard of before. If he had a scholarship to VMI, and they somehow yanked the scholarship because colleges can just do that whenever they feel like it. And if he had gone to an SEC school, an ACC school, and performed even reasonably well, he would have probably been a top 2 rounds pick. But because even when teams did go scout Doyle that spring, they saw him against Division II competition. It was really hard to get a read on what kind of hitter he was. If he'd gone to the draft league and teams have been able to scout him, probably against better competition, we'll see what the league actually looks like. He would have at least had a chance to help his draft stock. If he'd gone there and performed, he would have been scouted more and he would have probably gone a round or 2 higher. So that's the kind of player I think we're going to get in the draft league, and I'm completely here for it. I will absolutely go to games if those are the kinds of players we're seeing, because a lot of them are going to end up in the big leagues, even if we think they're only 3rd to 5th rounders. So what? Lots of 3rd to 5th rounders end up in the big leagues. Lots of them get better pretty quickly. I wrote about a bunch this offseason of guys who were drafted after the 5th round who suddenly are really good prospects. John Heasley in the Royal system was one. Guys who just, they were mishandled for one reason or another in college, or it didn't click. They had a bad time with a coach, suddenly getting a pro ball. And it's like, oh yeah, wait, hey, we're going to teach you a changeup. Oh, I have a changeup. My college coach just never called for it. Those guys will have a chance in the draft league. And that's why I actually think there's a lot of problems with minor league realignment. I am not dismissing those, but the draft league is a good thing. How will pandemic seasons, weird schedules affect this year's draft? Will we see fewer high school players taken? That's a great question. I do not know the answer. I speculated we may see more high school players taken because scouts saw them more last summer and fall than they saw the college players. We don't have the Cape. We don't have Team USA. We have very limited college summer data on players. Typically in the draft, we would have had lots of data, performance data, scouting looks, and probably some TrackMan type data as well. We have more of that on high school players now than we do on college players, which is absolutely the reverse of what we typically expect. It is also a bad year for college position players. That crop is really down this year. So that may also push teams to take some high school players. However, as you said in your question, Allie, a lot of high schools haven't started yet. North Carolina starts very late. I believe California is also starting extremely late for good reason. But that means we can't scout those players. I was looking because I'm going to try to I can drive to North Carolina, would like to try to hit down there this month. Just thinking, oh, maybe I can pop in and see Khalil Watson while I'm there. I can go see him practice, but I'm not going to get to see him in a game. I might still do that because there's value in that. But scouts ultimately want to see guys in games whenever possible, and we're just not going to get there for several more weeks. And that is going to hurt some high school players. It's absolute teams are not going to rush to take a high school player they feel like they've barely seen. Did the Pirates miss with Nick Gonzalez? It's way too soon to say that. Was it just a safe pick with not a lot of upside? That's much more accurate to me. He's going to play in the big leagues. He's a nice player. He is, I think, has very little chance to be a star. You'd have to think that more of his power was real rather than being in no small part an artifact of him playing at a pretty good altitude there at New Mexico State. And also, I think he's a no doubt second baseman, not a shortstop. If suddenly he turns into, I really think this is unlikely. If he turns into a shortstop, he can stay at shortstop. That changes the outlook. If there's more power in there, even when he's sitting with a wood bat at sea level, that would change the outlook. I don't think either of those two things is very likely. Is there a market for the Dodgers to move David Price to make room for Mayor Gonzalez to move into the rotation? So I will just start by saying I don't track. I'm not talking to any major league executives about the trade market for players. However, my attitude is there's pretty much always a market to trade a player if you're willing to pay some or all of his salary. If the Dodgers just went out there and said, look, we'll pay Price's salary, we'll pay 80% of Price's salary. You can have David Price for $1 million a year. Of course they'll get a taker. They'll probably even get a prospect back for that. They may not want to do that. Teams just don't like doing that. They don't like paying somebody, especially for somebody to go be good for someone else. And Price could be good for someone else. Price, I think, has value in the right situation. If Kumar struggles in SEC play, what do I think his floor is? If he's healthy at the draft, I don't know. Now I'm talking a little bit out of the air here, but he's not getting out of the top 5 picks. I can't imagine a scenario where that happens unless he's hurt. That's the one thing, is if something's wrong, actually gets hurt, or suddenly is sitting at 90, something's obviously amiss. I throw those out. If he struggles with results but is still showing stuff, I still think he goes in the top 5 picks. it would be pretty disastrous for him to get outside of that. He's too famous. He's been seen too much, and he has some of the. There will always be teams that'll chase size and velocity like that. Obviously, I'm not in that camp, right? I put Leiter over him. I think that should tell you a bit about how my own philosophy of evaluating players has changed over the years. I'm still fascinated by Hedberg Perez as a 17-year-old in big league spring training. Thoughts? I haven't seen him yet. I haven't seen any of the Brewers have a really good group of extremely young Latin American players they signed in 18 and 19. Eduardo Garcia is actually, I think, the best of them. He ended up at their alternate site last summer. He looked very good in instructs. He is the one I would most like to see. There you go, another teaser from tomorrow's column. Teams are bringing some of those guys to spring training now just to get them going, just to get them started playing. I don't know that you should read anything into it other than that the team obviously thinks he's good, right? The Brewers obviously think that Perez is good and is worth making this kind of investment. I probably wouldn't go any farther than that. Mickey Moniak looks so much bigger than when the Phillies drafted him. Well, it makes sense. It's 5 years now, right? He's probably bulked up. Is there anything there? Him getting bigger, his size was never the issue. If anything could work against him, right? He was already pretty marginal in center field when I saw him. If he slows down any further, he has no chance to play center field. But his lack of power was never a function of strength or size for me. It's swing and stance, top and bottom. He would just need a complete overhaul. And I don't know that you couldn't do it. He has the length in his levers to potentially get his swing to a good, longer in a good way to potentially drive the ball, but he just hasn't hit. And I don't think he has really good pitch recognition at all. So I really don't think there's anything there beyond an extra outfielder. What are my thoughts on Jordan Adams of the Angels? Seems to be a great athlete, and I'm following his development closely. He is a tremendous athlete. He was a wide receiver, and he was going to go to UNC as a wide receiver until he sort of popped up that spring, and people realized, oh, this guy not only can play baseball, but he wants to play baseball. He's an 80 runner. He's going to be an elite, like a 70 or better defender in center. I don't know if there's going to be a lot of power there, but I think there's pretty good bat speed, and I liked how his swing worked even in high school, even when he was still pretty raw, like just in terms of limited experience because he played so much football. So I'm on it. The Angels were doing some really funky things with his swing 2 years ago that I don't think helped him. They did a lot of sort of strange experiments with guys. They had a lot of guys who would start out, like they were almost starting out pointing the bat at the pitcher. And I think a lot of it was the sense of drills, but I don't like seeing that stuff in games, especially for a guy whose swing at the time they drafted him, whether it was perfect or not is another thing, but it was simple. It was simple and he could repeat it. When you've got a guy with limited playing experience who has a swing that he can repeat right now, I think you don't mess with that. Not in the short term, at least. He's still in my top 5 in their system. His upside is tremendous. There's absolutely a chance he just never turns into anything, though, because he has so little experience, and we still don't have a great feel for how good of a hitter he is. Does Jack Leiter have the leverage to push himself down to his dad's employer, the Mets? No, he does not. Somebody would just take him and tell him, you want to go back to school? Fine, we'll take the pick next year. Is A's Nick Allen really a multiple Gold Glove winner, as local writers keep saying? No. More generally, how well do scouting data predict star defensive potential? I think pretty well. I think we all knew what Cabrian Hayes was going to be defensively, and that's exactly what he's been so far in a month. But he came up and he was as advertised, and Jarlton Simmons turned out to be that. What that doesn't, what scouts won't see necessarily is the guy who gets to the majors and gets better. Nolan Aronado comes to mind. I saw Nolan Aronado. I still talk to there were a couple of scouts. We were all there that same week in Arizona Fall League, and Aronado looked like he had just given up, and he was a 40 defender at third base, and he was not playing hard, and he was basically only hitting fastballs at that point. And then within a year, I think he was actually in the big leagues by the end of the next year, and he was playing 70 defense at least already. And obviously he's an 80 defender, or has become an 80 defender since then. I don't know a scout who thought that was going to happen. I don't know anybody who thought that was coming. It's to Arenado's credit. It's to the Rockies' credit, obviously. But no one saw that coming. Not that I know of on the scouting side, coaching side, data analytics side. I don't know anybody who saw that. Do I think MLB ever adds trades to the draft process? No, because the union has no incentive. The union would have to insist on it. Owners don't want it for whatever reason. It's stupid. Owners should do it because it would make the draft more interesting. If you want the draft to become a product of its own, it's never going to be the NFL draft, but it could be a pretty interesting product of its own. It could have more of an audience. Obviously, you're here. You're part of the audience. But it would have more of an audience if we could have trades. But neither side, that has to be collectively bargained, and neither side has any real incentive to push for it. Neither side is willing to give anything up to get trades introduced into the draft process. It sucks. We're worse off for it. Do I think service time, ridiculous 7-year rookie contracts will be changed by the new negotiations? It seems unsustainable and also damages the game due to no free agency until late-ish in a career. So there's multiple questions in there. I think service time will be changed in the new negotiations. I don't think the 7-year rookie contracts will. Are you referring, if you're just referring to the fact that it's 6.5 years or so till someone gets to free agency, that I believe is going to change. If you're thinking of the kinds of contracts that Evan White just signed and that the Mariners apparently tried to get Jared Kelenic to sign, are those going away? No, I don't think anybody's, because the players are often happy with those. So I don't think those are going to go away. But that's what you mean by those 7-year rookie contracts. I do think you may see the time to free agency drop. You can see it drop by a year. I'd be fine with it dropping by 2 years, but I think teams would really oppose that. How will the draft league impact the quality of Cape rosters? I actually think you're going to get some bifurcation in the talent, in the college talent. So for those who don't know, the Cape Cod League is typically the best play. It's the best college summer league there is. They get the best talent. And that's been true for a very long time. And those are almost always rising juniors and rising sophomores. So guys who have not been part of the draft process since high school. You will occasionally get some rising seniors who either have been drafted but were drafted lower, who maybe passed over. And then there are typically some junior college guys, a few other smattering of other players who fill in the rosters. But the heart of the talent in that league has been rising juniors who will be in the following year's draft class. You go to the Cape, you're scouting the following year's draft class. That's not what the draft league is going to have. The draft league is this year's draft class. So I don't know exactly how they're going to restrict players coming to the draft league, but my belief from talking to people in MLB months ago about this was that it would be aimed at players who are in this year's draft. Those are guys who often don't go to the Cape, or who might agree to go to the Cape, but it's tentative. And hey, if I get drafted, I'm just going to sign. Those kinds of guys. I just think they're not going to go to the Cape. And I think what you'll see on the Cape will be more players who are not in this year's draft class. And again, maybe some of those, local small college or junior college guys who just agree to fill in on the Cape, who maybe don't get invited to the draft league. So I actually think both of those things can coexist at the same time. Could Ronnie Mauricio's FV, I assume you mean future value, be impacted negatively if he gets too big for shortstop despite more power? Yes. Yeah, if he ends up outgrowing shortstop, but I don't think that's very likely. And he is a very good defensive shortstop too. So he's got a little more room to grow, I guess pun intended, before we even really have to think about moving him off shortstop. I also do think he's going to get to some power. My understanding, he's already looked bigger and stronger so far this spring. We'll see how that plays out. They all look great until the games start. And then you realize that guy actually got bigger in a good way, and that guy just got bigger. Who are West Ham going to sign? What? Sorry, buddy. I think you're in the wrong room. I do know that that's a soccer question. That's about the most I can tell you. But of sports from the United Kingdom, I know a bit more about rugby, and I wouldn't say I know a lot, but I could probably answer rugby questions before I could start answering soccer questions. Who are the best NorCal players this year and next, high school or college? I'll tell you, there was nobody on my radar really for the top 30. There will be some players drafted out there, and the fact that the high school players up there have not started playing is certainly working against is working against California guys on my rankings, period. Now, a few of them have tried to do some stuff on the side. Some players have actually gone to Arizona to try to start playing, to try to play some exhibitions on the weekends, just to try to get scouted. But I think the second and third tier high school guys in states like California, which I completely, I'm not criticizing California's decision not to have the games, but I do think that some of those guys are just going to be hurt. They're just going to end up not going to get drafted as high. And I'm not talking about the Marcelo Meyer types or Mayer. I'm not sure how he says it, but those guys they're going to be fine. But I'm more concerned about the second rounder out of a Northern California high school who would have gotten over slot because he had a decent college commitment. That guy just does not, in my opinion, doesn't do well. Maybe some of the kids who were at like Jay Sarah, which always has a player or two. My guess is some of those players like that, maybe they end up going to college because they just don't get seen as much this spring. Or maybe they go to the draft league too. That's a new variable, but I would say without the draft league, or if they simply choose not to go to the draft league, some of those kids are just going to end up in school. There's Grant Holman at Cal. I think he's like a 3rd to 5th rounder. Ricky Tiedemann is at a junior college out there. He could be a 2nd, 3rd rounder maybe. But I think we're going to have to wait to see them start playing before we'll have a better sense of, if the talent in NorCal is actually just bad this year. Is it just down this year? Or is it that they haven't started playing and we haven't gotten a chance to start evaluating them? I'm only going to hear stuff from scouts on players once their players are actually playing, right? I talk to scouts and hey, who have you seen lately? And how did so-and-so play for you? Did you see this guy? So same with the North Carolina high school kids. It is going to hurt some of them, and it sucks, but that's unfortunately the world we're in right now. How do I assess the University of Louisville's baseball program? It has been generally successful at the collegiate level, but seems to have failed at developing talent at the MLB level. Why? I do not agree with that. Will Smith is a pretty good big leaguer already, and I think he's only going to get better. Brendan McKay, I think, is going to be a very good big leaguer. He's in the big leagues, right? He's just not been fully healthy yet. Also, that program, baseball is a long runway sport when it comes to development. So if you start developing, if you made me the athletics director at a college, don't do that, and said, part of your mandate is to build a world-class baseball program here. We want to be one of the 20 best programs in Division I. It would be several years before that, whatever plans I put into place at that point, which would include a lot of changes to the coaching staff and improving facilities, it would be at least 5 years, I think, from that point before you'd start to see a meaningful impact in the draft. And then you're talking 2 to 4 years after that until the impact on the draft starts to become impact in the big leagues. So you could easily, I would say it's probably 8 to 10 years from the day that I get this hypothetical job at Penn State University to the day when people say, hey, Penn State's really a good program at developing big league talent. And to me, Louisville is probably in like year 6 or 7 of that. I think it's way too early to start talking about them as failing at developing big league talent. I think they are doing a great job. They do. I don't agree with everything they do at all. But ultimately, I cannot argue with the fact that has become one of the most important programs to see. If you're scouting for the draft, it's one of the most important programs to see every year. I think that, and I will try to see them this year. Hopefully this month. We'll see. We'll see how schedules go and how COVID goes, etc. All right. Well, it looks like that is all of the questions in here. So I appreciate all of you jumping in. Thanks to those of you who read the draft article from next week. I will just plug one more time. I do have a piece coming out tomorrow. One prospect from every major league team that I am looking forward to seeing this year once minor league baseball begins. I also should mention, I even have a copy of it here. My publisher would kill me if I didn't mention The Inside Game, my second book, which came out last year. Bad Calls, Strange Moves, What Baseball Behavior Teaches Us About Ourselves, combining baseball stories and cognitive psychology. So if you have heard about Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow, but maybe not read it because it's 450 pages and the print is really, really tiny and it's very good, but it's kind of dense. This book explores some similar concepts, but I try to do it in a lighter way by using baseball examples to explain cognitive biases that affect all of our decision-making. This comes out in paperback, which is substantially lighter than the hardcover that I have in my hand right now, on April 6th, which is exactly 4 weeks from today. So you can pre-order it now, Bookshop, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, your local independent bookstore. I know they would appreciate the business, and I'm really hopeful that I get those vaccines so I can come out and meet some of you, and we can actually do some book signing events and meet and greets, and I can sign your books and talk to you about it, because when I did that for my first book, Smart Baseball, was absolutely my favorite part of the process. Thank you so much for joining me, everyone. Stay safe.